So let's begin with prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we thank you that thou art the way, the truth, and the life. And that we can discover what real life is and what real love is through an authentic encounter with thee. And so we pray now that as we consider the topic of joy with respect to the raising of those children of whom we are stewards, that we might be enlightened by the power of the Holy Spirit, that Caitlin will be empowered by the Holy Spirit as she speaks, so that we can hear the truth and that she might be able to speak the truth in love about this great task of parenting, this great task of joy. So we give thee glory together with thine eternal Father, thy most holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen. Amen. Parenting for joy. I'm really looking forward to this because I think that every honest parent will admit that there are some times where we don't feel really close to joy. And I think that's why we have to hear about this. I think this is why we have to talk about this, is that we need a vision for parenting. We can't just wake up and just go like robots. What's the next task? Boom, just keep knocking them over. And I know that Father Alexander Schmemann of blessed memory was referring to a rather infamous philosopher of the Enlightenment, Friedrich Nietzsche, who made the declaration that Christianity is joyless. That was his statement about Christianity. And Father Alexander went on to say that, really, this is a great heresy. If we are joyless, this is a great heresy. We are stepping away from the gospel. Love, joy, all the different things, all the fruit of the Spirit. These are given to us, but they're not given to us like we've entered into happy clappy land. That's not the calling, is it? It's not this real weird manic giddiness that we're called to. Because sometimes the task of joy is embracing, like stepping into a very cold river. And yet we're called to rejoice in all things. All things, not when things are great, not when we have the blessing that we are happy for, but for the reality that we are, and this is again another emphasis of that Father Alexander and all the fathers in the New Testament, all through the scriptures, is that the joy comes through communion with God. And so when David says in the Psalms, he says, when I go into Hades, thou art there. Then there's even joy there. And we even have a modern saint, Saint Sophrony of Essex, who said, keep your mind in health and do not despair. And so when we're going through the very real stuff of life that can be externally corrosive to our children, to us as parents, to us as people, that we still have the resource and the reality and the calling, even in walking through the valley of the shadow of death, to know his presence. Thou art with me, right? Thou art with me. So the joy is there. Love, joy, peace, long-suffering, all the fruit of the Spirit, right? So, and it doesn't mean, again, it's not joy like like something simplistic, but joy is something deep. Joy is something transformative. Joy that is communion, rooted in love. And so I am thrilled that this is a great topic. And I'm thrilled that Cate Gilbert has come. She's one of the founders of the Saint Constantine School. You are on the original team. What vision and faith you must have had, starting off, It's scary stuff to start. You don't know where it's going to end, right? But God bless you, because it's growing and growing, and it's diversifying, and it's not just it's college, but it's a whole range of education. And now we're starting with schools. We're starting one here, the Constantine School of Denver Metro, right? And one in Pittsburgh that's opening this year, or is it out
next year?
Next year. It's a zero. They're near zero. So it can happen, right? It can happen. So thank you, Caitlin, for coming and sharing with us today. And I invite you to come forward. If you're comfortable, just watch your step as you step up on a little thing here.
Well, thank you all for missing out on Taylor Swift being here. I was a little worried as I wrote this talk that I'd put too much Aristotle in talking about parenting, but I kind of get the feeling that this might be the crowd for it, so I'm leaving it in. As Father David said, my name is Cate Gilbert. I was the founding head of school for the Saint Constantine School in Houston, and as we look to launch more schools, which was always a part of our founding vision, that has become my role. So I'm excited to be here. Alongside my administrative role, all of our faculty and staff teach, and so I've taught great books in our college and high school, hence all the Aristotle. But more importantly, I am the mother of 4 young children myself, and I'm parenting right alongside you. I had an unusual path to becoming a teacher and a school administrator. I never really thought about being a teacher. My graduate work is in the theology of spiritual formation. Spiritual formation programs study how we take the concepts that we know about God and actually allow them to transform our lives. It asks, what are the practices and the habits and the methods of prayer, the life of the heart and mind that draw us closer to God? And how do we help people cultivate that in their lives? That's what I really care about. I tell my students all the time that I am only in education because I believe that, especially in the lives of children, a good education is one of the most powerful tools that we have towards forming our children in holiness. I deeply love literature. I love studying philosophy and theology and the great books, but that kind of work is not an end in and of itself. It is a tool. It is the way that we step towards fuller humanity and a greater understanding of God. And I'm pleased to say I am not the only one who thinks this. A few years ago, we gave all of our teachers a print from St. Amelia's Post. Kelsey is a wonderful Orthodox painter and illustrator. You should look her up on Etsy. The print has this beautiful painting of St. Theophan the Recluse in the woods. And on it is a famous quotation from him that you may have heard before. Of all holy works, the education of children is the most holy. If I think about it for any length of time, this quote stuns me. Like, what does that mean? The most holy? How could that be? Is the education of children more important to our holiness than feeding the poor or fasting? Prayer? What is it about the education of children that could possibly make it the most holy work we will ever partake in? St. John Chrysostom echoes a similar statement. He has a lot to say about raising children, actually, but I was first introduced to 2 of his quotations by a family who drove into Houston from Austin, which is about 3.5 hours away. Their youngest son was entering high school, and they were looking for the right school for him. and they were considering moving to Houston in order to send their son to high school. We were pretty blown away by this. And the student's father said something to me and my husband that we will never forget. He pulled out this little book, and he said, people move for a job all the time. They move for better jobs or because they think they'll make more money. But St. John Chrysostom says, and here's the quote, "We take all care indeed to have our farm in good order, and to commit it to a faithful manager. But we do not look out for what is much more important, for the people to whom we will commit our sons, as the guardian of his morals, though this is a possession much more valuable than all the others. We take care of our possessions for our children, but for the children themselves we take no care at all." This is from his homilies on 1 Timothy in homily 9. Mr. Landon, who was introducing us to this, then said, because he had been willing to move for many jobs in his life, he needed to be willing to move for the sake of his son. I think St. John Chrysostom would have been proud of that sentiment. For in homily 21 of his homilies on Ephesians, he says, "Let everything take second place to the care for our children." I have devoted my work and my life to the idea that everything should take second place to the care of children. With founding the school in Houston and all that, because I believe that families need a community who can do this together, and that children spend too much of their life at school for us not to make those schools in the image of their maker. But do you know what is a lot more important about forming a child in a school? The family. And St. John Chrysostom and St. Theophan the Recluse aren't talking to teachers. At least I don't think they are. I think they're talking to parents. Because it is the family that is the primary educator and former of our children. And I want you to hear that those saints are talking to you, mothers and fathers. Your parenting is the most holy of works, and everything should take second place to doing it well. I am honored and blessed to be a teacher, but my greatest work is to be a mother. As Christian parents in a secular age, we have a particular and difficult calling. But the more I think about it, and the more I research child development for my job and design curriculum and cultivate school culture, and just get to know hundreds and hundreds of kids and college students, the more I believe that our job as Christian parents is to help our children cultivate true happiness in a world that has forgotten how to be joyful. And to me, that is a hopeful and exciting calling. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. I would like to argue that as Christian parents, one of our primary duties is to help our children learn how to love the good, which is of course God and all his works, so that they can be truly happy. And that cultivating an atmosphere of joy and stability and unity in our homes will most help us do this. I gave a talk a few weeks ago at a big classical education conference, and I argued that schools should also be oriented towards helping children cultivate happiness. And people did not like it at first. They liked it in the end, but they really argued with me about it at the beginning. Someone asked me if in talking about a child's happiness, I was thinking about designing school programs that just catered to students' preferences. Another said that happiness itself was elusive and an impossible target, particularly in children, and so could never be a worthy or attainable goal. And this indicated to me that many of us have a serious misunderstanding of what happiness is in a classical or even deeply Christian sense. And that in order to talk about what it means to build a rich and joy-filled family life, we would need to start with a better understanding of happiness. It is a modern belief, a very modern belief, that the indulgence of our preferences, whatever they happen to be in the moment, is how one gets to be happy. Or that happiness is dependent on getting those preferences filled. Happiness is equated with something like getting to be your true self, getting to do whatever you want, or whatever you have a hankering for. But anyone with a little wisdom, or even just a little experience of yourself and life, knows that our preferences are terrible indicators of what will make us happy. For most of history, happiness was understood to be something very different. Aristotle starts the very first sentence of his landmark work, Nicomachean Ethics. Every art and every investigation, and likewise every practical pursuit or undertaking, seems to aim at some good. Hence it has been said that the good is that at which all things aim. Everything is trying to get to the good. When I teach this book to students, they get hung up on this sentence because it seems clear to so many of us that lots of people are not aiming at the good. Like, all the time. We're not always aiming at the good. But both Aristotle and his teacher's teacher, Socrates, would remind us that we are always, every person, trying to aim at the good because we're aiming at what we think is good. No one is trying to actively do themselves harm, even when we do something that we quote unquote, know is bad. Maybe you stayed up too late watching a show or scrolling the internet last night, even though you knew that it was bad for you and you should go to sleep. But your actual belief, which is what you acted on, was that watching TV was better. Everybody who's ever been on a diet has had this experience, right? Somewhere in your head, you know that this goal you have is good, but what you actually think is that ice cream is better. And that's why diets fail all the time. Even in very serious harm, this same principle is at play. No one thinks in their head that suicide or self-harm is good. But for the person contemplating suicide, they are being convinced that it is in fact better for them. It is a release from pain, an improvement. Now that is a lie, but it is a convincing lie. We are always aiming at the good. But even good things aren't an end in itself. Aristotle wants to know what makes something good. How do we decide that staying up too late watching TV or writing this talk, in my case, is good? Aristotle believes that we can identify the good because the good is that which produces happiness. Happiness, therefore, he says, being found to be something final and self-sufficient, is the end at which all actions aim. Everything we do it because we want to be happy. Aristotle means something, though, when he says happiness, and again, it is not like getting to do whatever we want. Rather, he would define it as an excellence of soul. So the kind of soul that contributes to your flourishing. And the only way to achieve excellence of soul is to practice virtue. Virtues are those habits and ways of being that allow us to flourish. They are the things that we participate in that make us happy in the long run. Aristotle will then go on to argue that it is our habits that will train us in virtue. The church trains us very similarly, doesn't it? It may not feel in the moment that fasting or faithful attendance at liturgy or quiet attention in prayer is making us happy. But we do those things because we know that they are the habits, the practices that help us to become holy. So when we deny ourselves, when we say no to our own preferences, say for a burger in the middle of Lent, we're doing so out of obedience and the knowledge that the practice will help us to become more Christ-like and make us holy. It helps us to become more like God and therefore more happy. In The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis pulls together a retelling of an ancient concept, one that he traces through Chinese philosophers, the Greeks, and the Christians, and one that he calls the Tao, or the Way. It is this idea that the very universe moves in a certain direction. Parmenides, a philosopher before even Plato and Socrates, called it the way that is. And for him, anything else couldn't even be thought of, really. That was the way of non-being, of nothingness. For the Christian, of course, this is a simple way of understanding that God, in his goodness and truth and beauty, is the very fabric of the universe. He is what holds all things together. The creation he has made it in some way in his own image, and it reflects him. Man, of course, most directly, but all of it reflects him still, despite its fall and corruptibilities. Anglican New Testament scholar N.T. Wright says, "The Christian tradition has said, and indeed sung, that glory belongs to God the Creator. It is his voice that we hear echoing off the crags and murmuring in the sunset. It is his power that we feel in the crashing of the waves and the roar of a lion. It is his beauty we see reflected in 1,000 faces and forms." This feels to me like an echo of my favorite poet, Gerard Manley Hopkins, when he reflects on the nature of God as he watches a stream. He says, "As kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim in roundy wells, stones sing. Like each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. He concludes, for Christ plays in 10,000 places." And that is what you're seeing, even in the life of a stream. The psalmist, of course, reflects this same idea when he says, "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hand. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge. Without speech or language, without a sound to be heard, their voice has gone out into all of the earth, their words to the ends of the world." With all this in mind, I want to make the suggestion that God and everything he makes is good. And we are designed to love God and his good creation, to be a participant, a restorer, to heal and to be healed, as we seek to recognize the good and the beautiful in the world as it was created, even as it is corrupted now. I believe that families need to be the place where we practice the things that bring about happiness. The patterns and the rhythms and the traditions. The way we do this is through family habits and culture. A culture is built through tradition and practice. And traditions don't care about what people think now. Tradition insists that the way we have done it in the past is worth doing now. It doesn't care about your preferences. It insists that the past has known better. Like virtue, tradition says, here is the path towards flourishing. Just follow it. Just follow along. Liturgy works like this. I grew up in the evangelical church where it was expected that our liturgy, if you could call it that, would keep up with the times. The greatest marker of success in church is if people were not bored. If it was easy and relatable and instantly comfortable, then we were succeeding. As I came to know the older Christian traditions, I was shocked to find them take a totally different stance. The Divine Liturgy is an invitation, but it is an invitation that does not care about your preferences. It seeks to shape your preference towards the right worship of God. It stays the same so that you can change. Reading old books works like this too. At Saint Constantine, we don't read anyone who hasn't been dead for at least 50 years. And it isn't because good books aren't being written now. They probably are. I don't know. I don't read them. But we won't know until they have stood the test of time, until they have gotten beyond our immediate preferences, and then we could probably assess if they're truly good or not. Once they are old, you know if they're good. There's lots of old books that nobody reads anymore. They just didn't make it. It is hard to read the Iliad at 14, but in Houston right now, there's about 35 14-year-olds who are trying as they get ready for school to start. It is much easier to play the latest video game instead. But we know that the Iliad has trained generations of young men in the importance of honor, has shown us for 1,000 years the value of humility and the difference between proper and improper pride. We know that St. Basil was telling his students to read it so that they could grow in wisdom. So that's what we're going to do. Our grandest traditions, like the traditions of the church, stand against a spirit of the age, whatever it is, because it is always changing. The traditions of our home could do that too. Our home must reflect what we believe about the world and about God. And I would suggest that given our culture and time, the thing we most need to help children believe, to live in and to practice, is that God is good and his creation is good and that joy is possible. I don't know how many of you have read Lewis's That Hideous Strength. It's one of my favorite books. But in it, a small band of Christians know that there is a grand conspiracy to take over the world. But they are waiting for God to tell them what to do. So in the meantime, they're gardening, and they have a pet bear. And I sometimes feel like that at Saint Constantine. We're like playing with the vegetables and raising goats, and I'm like, maybe this will help usher in the kingdom of God? I don't know. But as parents, our chief job is to assert with our mouths and the very patterns of our lives that God is good. This doesn't seem like it should be hard, but I actually think it is getting harder every day. One of the main roles of the parent is to show your child what is good and to help push them past their little preferences so that they can prefer the better. We are meant to model to them that which is worthy of their love. Notice that the very idea of a thing being worthy of love means that there are things that you can love rightly or wrongly, deservedly or undeservedly. And this idea is not a popular one in the culture of radical individualism that we live in today. I generally find that students are all well and good with this idea of like loving the good until you tell them that it applies to their clothes and to their music. That there is good music and bad. That there is a good way to dress and a bad way to dress. And we're not just talking about modesty, we're talking about beauty. Then you're really going to have to defend yourself. Are you ready to defend the good? Are you ready to assert what is good in your home and to reject and protect your children from what is not worthy of their love, even if it is in the form of an iPhone or a cartoon that everybody is watching? If talking about Aristotle's view of happiness and why the good is an objective standard found in God sounds theoretical or unrelatable to you, I want to suggest that it is neither, because it is incredibly practical for one reason. We cannot accept the current state of child and teenage well-being. Something is clearly dreadfully wrong by every statistic that we can come up with to measure. And I think we have this individualistic and secular framework for the human person to blame for this. Our children, especially our teenagers, who I know best, are hurting deeply and pervasively. And it is exhausting to work hard every single day to try to pull them back from this brink of despair, to persuade them that they are lovable and loved, that they are capable, that the world is good and worth exploring, that it is not something that you can only confront in great anxiety or fear. I will do that. I will fight for that every day if I need to, but we can do so much better. We have to stop capitulating to the very edges of a diseased view of personhood and education. Teenagers today, though it is certainly not unique to them, as it is growing in every demographic, suffer from deep loneliness. The pandemic exacerbated this in multiple ways, from being isolated in their home for several months, to having school disrupted and having only social media and online communication available to them. And of course, it has been widely shown that social media use actually makes people feel much more lonely, not less. But I think the foundations of deep loneliness have long been present. Our families are smaller and more fragmented than they have ever been. Grandparents and aunts and uncles probably don't live nearby. Parents are more distracted. Neighborhoods are less neighborly. Meals are less likely to be eaten together because we're very busy and we're all doing different things. And bedrooms are more likely to be just for one person instead of shared with a multitude of siblings. Our growing insistence on the value of unique identity has also been particularly important on our young people who find themselves increasingly isolated by design. Rather than being marked and identified by your family, I am so-and-so, son of so-and-so, as our ancient literature would have it, or by your village, or by your faith. You are, as a child, expected to decide who you are, entirely independent of the forces that we have always relied on to shape us. I think the hope was that we would more easily escape generational sin if we were not defined by our families or the culture that we inherit, but how and where we are raised. But my suspicion is that these things still influence us just as much, without the awareness that allows us to be proud of the good and to be grounded in a place and a people, to feel like a part of something. Young people feel like they have this huge decision in front of them to create themselves out of nothing, and the pressure is overwhelming. G.K. Chesterton says that the good soldier doesn't fight because he hates what is in front of him. He fights because he loves what is behind him. In teaching our children to love that which is worth loving, in modeling that to our families, and endowing our kids with a deep sense that they are part of a good culture and community, a church and a family, we are giving them something worth fighting for. The growing despair of the secular world is because they have spent so much time rejecting that which is worth loving that they find that they don't have anything that's worth much at all. The very first sentence of Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina states, "All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." I've always thought that this was one of the most untrue things that anybody has ever said. Anyone who has been around a great deal of happy families, and I am lucky to have been one such person, knows that there is nothing more unique, quirky, funny, and weird than an individual family's private culture. The stories, the inside jokes, family recipes, the shared love of weird music or board games or a good fire or an idiotic dog, all of these things build up to be a fabric of a dynamic and joyful home life. There is something deeply satisfying and human about a happy family life, something that reaches into your soul and tells you things are going to be okay. It is culture. It is your unique culture, one that is yours, created in your family and your community, and it is something you are a part of and at home in. And it is what our children most miss in this busy and distracted age. Family culture comes about through boredom. It comes about through sitting at home together. Your leisure time makes up some of the most significant parts of your inner life. Now, what if we take away the cooking, the games, the songs, the conversations, the stories that have typically been a part of large and happy families, or even small and happy families who are all together, and we all go sit on our own beds or our chairs and couches and scroll social media or watch our tablet or play a video game by ourselves? No wonder we are sad and lonely. Our children feel it all the time. I remember growing up, I was homeschooled, so my mom was with us all the time. And I remember as a kid, like the 3 or 4 times she had like hour-long conversations on the phone. And I was like irate at how neglected we were. But I think like, imagine what our children, like if I felt that way about my mom talking to, I don't know, my grandmother on the phone, imagine what our children see when we're staring at this little rectangle that is so much more important to us than they are. I hate going out to dinner and seeing all these families and each of them has a little screen in front of them. They don't know what they're missing, and they don't realize that their children are being left alone, even when they are together. In asserting and modeling to our children that there is a good and that we can find it together, that there are lovable things in the world and in our homes and in our families that are worth spending your childhood and youth learning how to love them. We are insisting that God's world is full of meaning and value, which is an opposite message that they're getting elsewhere. We are telling our children that they are a part of something bigger, something truly good, and that their job is not to just create their own individual happiness despite the many pressures trying to take it away, which is the best we can hope for in a secular world, but rather their job is simply to seek where it is and to find it. If our good God has created a universe full of meaning and beauty and goodness, then our job is that of the explorer and the seeker. Our job is the seer and the lover. And what a wonderful calling that is. What a wonderful thing to be able to do together, to seek out the good, whether that be in cooking with one another, or going on a hike, or just a good conversation. This is the kind of hope that we can endow our students with, and our children with. It is a response, not a retreat, but a return to what we know to be true. Sally Clarkson, in her book, The Life-Giving Home, says, "When people ask me what my parents did that made me believe in God, without even thinking, I said, I think it was French toast on Saturday morning, and coffee, and Celtic music, and discussion, and candlelight in the evening. Because in moments like that, I saw the goodness of God in a way I couldn't ignore." I love Sally's view of the home. She believes that the homemaker and the parent's job is to just build a place where their children feel the richness of God's world in their everyday lives. Because our job is to endow our children with this right view of the world, which is that it is deeply rich, joy-filled, and meaningful. That it is a place where no sparrow goes unnoticed by the omnipotent God, where he meets us through incense and song, through bread and wine, and through one another. I did a podcast with my Dean of Student Life recently, and because he plans all the parties for the school, his question for the podcast was, why should schools have parties? At Saint Constantine, we take a lot of time from official learning in order to go on retreats or have feasts or play giant stupid games outside. And my answer to that question was to tell him a story about Sam Gamgee at the end of The Return of the King. At the end of the story in The Lord of the Rings, Sam Gamgee asks Gandalf, after he and Frodo have been rescued against all odds, and he finds out that his friends, who he thought were certainly dead, are also still alive and have been fighting for him all along. He asks the wizard, is everything sad going to come untrue? I loved this question because the answer is yes. Not just in the fictional world of The Lord of the Rings, but in this world. The very fabric of the universe, God's universe, is good. The sad and the bad, the wrong, that's untrue. That is temporary. And it is going to come untrue very soon in the grand scheme of things. Or as my boss, Dr. John Mark Reynolds, would say, to the Christian, the party is the real thing. The pain, the struggle, the hard work, that's temporary. Suffering is temporary. Christ has overcome. The party is the real thing. In other words that will be familiar to many of you, the truth about the world is declared in the Paschal Sermon. O death, where is your sting? O hell, where is your victory? Christ is risen and you are overthrown. Christ is risen and the demons are fallen. Christ is risen and the angels rejoice. Christ is risen and life reigns. Christ is risen and not one dead remains in the grave. If we want to endow our children with a right view of the world, it should have a lot of heaven in it. In this world, they will suffer, but they will never suffer in vain. In this world, they will see trouble, but the trouble isn't the end of the story. In this world, there will be darkness, but the darkness has already been overthrown. Not one dead remains in the grave. I truly believe that our children, Christian children, should be the happiest, children. And I hope that as Christians parents, we can see that we are given a great calling to help them cultivate real happiness, to help them embrace joy and hope as the real thing of the universe, and to help them establish an understanding of the world as rich and good and meaningful. Yesterday, I got to witness a beautiful Orthodox woman. She's long been a hero of mine just as an academic. She's a poet and a professor. But 5 months ago, she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. But she kept her speaking engagement at the conference I was at, and with her head wrapped in a scarf, she gave a talk about the Beatitudes and the role of suffering in the novels of Marilyn Robinson. And I got to witness someone who is dying assert that the world is deeply good, and that when Christ can say that it is the poor in spirit who are blessed, that means that even the sufferer gets to enter into the kingdom as a blessed and honored member. I wish that was what the secular world could see Christians do all the time, because it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. I have been deeply blessed also by my 6 and 4-year-olds' faith in God. They have never questioned that He is good, powerful, all-knowing, loving. He's a superhero. Makes sense to them. I think it is my job to help them deepen that belief and to stand against a world that would seek to take it from them and replace it with sheer despair. Long after our childish Bible lessons have been forgotten, and if and when real challenges come their way, I believe we have an opportunity now to build in them the resilience of the good soldier who knows that what he is fighting for is absolutely worth it, and who can see the goodness of God in the land of the living. Living well is the best invitation to loving the good. This is the Saint Constantine strategy anyways, to live so that our homes, overflowing with happy children, say something true to our neighbors. To create communities of families that foster whole and sound relationships, that have beautiful artistic expression, true conversation, good music, rich feasts, and real laughter. How stunningly different would we be to the world if Christian families were just the most fun families to have dinner with? If our homes were places of joy to welcome in those who desperately need it? Our job is to produce a culture that loves what is good, and in so doing models in our own small way a living testimony to the very fabric, the warp and weft of the universe, as it was created and as it was always meant to be. That's what good, strong families in a vibrant church can do. It lives out its daily calling of the inheritance that God has given us for the sake of the world that can no longer see the riches of the kingdom of God. This is why the saints can call it the most holy of work. The family can light a beacon and become a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. Now I realize that a lot of that is sort of a big picture. And so that is my big picture, that is my talk, but I'd love to talk to you about any questions that you have, or what this might look like practically, or some of the things that you face that make this feel impossible, if any. But thank you.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
I have a bunch of questions, so I'll just try to be quiet. But, we've talked a bit here about trying to have events that evoke, and this is kind of a popular word right now, but enchantment or re-enchantment for children. To, for example, we've had in the past few years since I've come here, we had somebody said, I want to do a Christmas thing. And I said, okay, go ahead, just do it. You know, do what you want to do. You're blessed. And it was, you know, it was okay. But, you know, it was basically trying to reach out to the culture around us in a way that was familiar. So we had the classic Santa Claus with, you know, come up and what do we want for Christmas? We had that, and we had some good stuff too. We had some crafts, you know. But it was like, you know, let's try to do something that will really, like, I don't know, bring them in and kind of bring something new to the table in terms of re-enchanting our hearts and stuff. Do you have any? I mean, that's very specific, but do you have any thoughts about how that is done in general in concrete ways?
I think that is a wonderful question because it is exactly the right sort of thing to want to do. Children naturally, like, they're enchanted easily compared to us jaded adults, and so I think we have to sort of indulge our desire for beauty and for creativity, and to just kind of like really direct it towards whatever we're doing for them. I grew up in a community that had some very creative moms in it, and I don't remember what we were doing. It was some sort of history club. And I don't really remember that much about history, but I remember every detail of this, which was they decided to recreate the experience of what it would be like for a runaway slave to be on the Underground Railroad. And so we went up to someone's house, and it was dark, and they ushered us, all the adults had planned it all out, so they were stationed all over this property, and they were all in costume, and they ushered all the children into this beautiful old farmhouse that had a quilt hanging up, because we had read about how those had been symbols to indicate a safe place. And then she told us, like, here's the path that you're going to follow. And we, from that moment on, we were in it. Like, we were like trying to escape from the South. You know, California white kids, I don't know. But I remembered it to this day. And so I think of a Christmas party for children, and I think we should probably build a tunnel off the door. And then they would come in here, and this would look totally different. And even if we have to curtain something off, or we bring in somebody has a bunch of fake Christmas trees, let's bring those in, you know, like, and then the food and the way that you talk to them and the way that you read them stories, like, all of it has to be a part of whatever that experience is that you're building. And they will remember it forever, and they will be fully in it, because that's how children work. They're ready to be enchanted by those things. And I think we often let our sort of practicality get in the way. And I'm not a very, like, that's not my thing. I'm not about to create, like, Narnia out of a parish hall. But I know there are people who that is their thing. And that is a way that they can gift the children. And again, I think it's kind of like it's a sweet calling from God to allow us to use our creativity in those ways to bless them. I think food's really important too. Kids know when you're feasting and when something is really special in that way. And that's one of the things we like to do a lot at school. And I think the Orthodox Church does this a lot, where, you know, there are particular foods that are associated with particular saints or particular days. And that really helps children kind of get into the spirit of, oh, this is a special day. Like, we get to have Lucia buns. Hooray, you know? And that's what they remember. It takes a few years for them to remember why they're eating them, but...
Yeah. Great. Thank you. That's great. Anybody?
I have questions as an educator, not as a parent. But I teach middle school social studies and English. I'm going into my second year. And I've had this discussion with some of my coworkers about, like, what education is, and teaching kids to be good, not just to be smart or pass tests.
Yeah.
But I have a really hard time. I teach at a lower income school where parents aren't as involved. The kids are kind of just sent there because they're supposed to go to school. Maybe their cousins go there, so that's kind what our community's like. So what are ways that you've like worked with parents who, like I've heard a lot about how the Saint Constantine parents like bring their kids there and they, you know, bring them there for a purpose and they're super involved, and like what about parents that are not, and how do you get them there as a teacher like this?
It's you have a big challenge in front of you that many teachers face, most teachers face, which is if you cannot rely on the families to do this, it's still worth doing for them, which means your classroom might be the only place where they get to see some of the goodness and creativity of God. And that's a lot of pressure. You said your social studies though?
I've been teaching English and I'm taking a social studies class.
Well, this might be biased because that's what I teach too, but I think those are some of the areas that this is most like ripe for, right? Like we're telling stories. Why don't we just tell them a lot better and with, with, I don't know, props and costumes and snacks. Snacks actually works better than anything else. I don't know why. Snacks always wins. They will remember the snack forever. Whatever you can do to make the sort of history subjects that often come up in social studies sticky, like whether that's a not literally sticky, but something that sticks in their mind, like sometimes making something together. We had a bunch of students try to build Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine, and the teacher didn't give them any instruction. She put up the picture that he had, drawn, and said, "Okay, guys, these are like he wrote this so you can make a flying machine." They were so into it. Like they were like, "I am going to fly. Like that is what is about to happen today." So they all built them all, and they all tried to jump off the slide, and they all fell down, and no one flew. But it was an awesome day, and they will remember that forever. But it's a weight, like it's an enormous weight on you. Parents sometimes do come to teachers and ask for advice, and at that point, you can always say, turn everything off and just talk to your kids, read to them, feed them, that's what they need. Anything else?
I'm not sure how to word this. I think sometimes, being adults, can they sometimes dreary your world, be consumed with the treachery of life, adulting, right?
Yeah.
And I like the discussion about the things that will enchant our children and show them God's goodness. But I'm curious to explore more to how can we as adults show joy and show that adulthood contains joy. So do you have any thoughts around that?
I had a teacher in high school. He was my grade books teacher. He was the only teacher I had because everything else I was homeschooled, but my mom farmed this one out. And his students were kind of all around the country, and there's 1 week in the summer when he would invite everyone to his home. And we would all, I'd stay there, and we were there during the day. And we would just do stuff that he thought was interesting. So he would be like, today we're putting on a play, and tomorrow we're doing a debate, and then we're going to have a big dance, and you're all going to learn country line dancing, and then we're going over here, and we're going to garden. It was just like, and it didn't make, and what I realized later was he was just saying, like, here are good things. Like, get involved in them. And I think one of the things that I struggle with so much, my husband and I talk about this all the time, is we're really tired. Like, we both work full time. We have 4 children under the age of 6. Like, we're exhausted. And so the thing I want to do when I get home is sit on the couch and look at my phone. It is the easiest possible thing. And we have to fight that. And instead, do something that is actually restful, actually joyful. And that's going to be different for everybody. It might be they're just seeing you read a book instead. Or they're seeing you practice the piano because you want to learn an instrument. Or you say, come on guys, we're going to make dinner together. It takes a little bit of effort that I feel myself, but it also actually is more restful. And one of the things that we are working really hard with our teenagers right now at Saint Constantine is none of them have hobbies. Like nobody had, they don't even know, they were like, you tell me not to use my phone, but then like, what would I do? And I was like, first of all, you could do your reading. But second of all, there are these things called hobbies that people have used for generations. And they're all different, and you get to pick the one you enjoy, and you might like make something cool or learn something about the world. And adults are the quickest to give up our hobbies. And I think children need to see us engaging in hobbies. They need to see us passionate about things. My husband is a film nerd, and so he's constantly checking with me like, is this film appropriate yet? I'm like, no, you can't do that. But he recently introduced our two boys to the 1970s Superman. And he was so excited. They loved it. Like, they thought it was the most epic thing they've ever seen. But he sat there and he watched it with them. And it was something that they did together because he loves movies and they all love Superman. And then a few months later, the Alamo Drafthouse, which is like a little boutique theater by us, was playing it at the theater. And they'd never been to the theater before. So the three of them put on their Superman shirts and they got to go to the theater for the first time and see Superman. And that's just a really like, they're going to remember that. And it's, it's screen time. That's bad in some ways, but it's screen time spent together. And it's something that my husband genuinely loves and wants to share with them. And I think, again, this is like one of those callings, like don't give up on the things that actually bring you joy. Bring your children into them. We just have to get a little more energy. I really, really want this for grandparents too. Like, I don't want to push it on my parents, but grandparents have so much to give their grandkids. And I'm worried that a lot of grandkids aren't experiencing it anymore because everyone's so distracted. And it's really easy. My mom's, on her phone, but she knows how to bake sourdough bread, and she knows how to that's what I want for them, is to use those things.
At seminary, Father Thomas Hopko of blessed memory absolutely commanded us to find a hobby as priests. Just like, because we just like, there's no punching in and punching out time clock or anything like that, and we're all, pretty obsessive about what we do, and so it's that was and honestly, I mean, how many times have we had a conversation in our own? I told my wife, I don't know what hobby to do. What am I going to do? So it's tough. The other thing I would just comment on is who was it? Was it Lewis that said the people who need fairy stories the most are not kids, they're adults, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to really, and he thought science fiction even was a kind of fairy story. So, just enjoying kind of getting out of your own head and stuff like that, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you all. Thank you all very much for having me.
Thank you. Wonderful.